Don't let anybody make you think that God chose America as his divine messianic force to be a sort of policeman of the whole world. God has a way of standing before the nations with judgment, and it seems that I can hear God saying to America, you're too arrogant. And if you don't change your ways, I will rise up and break the backbone of your power.
Welcome back, Freedom Now listeners. This is Femi with Freedom Now, a Pan-Africanist, internationalist, world affairs program, the voice for African and indigenous voices worldwide.
Salam, which means peace in my home country of Ethiopia. This is Sister Tati. Stay tuned for our agenda here on Freedom Now. And as always, we stand ready for revolution.
Habari Gani. This is Sister Thage with Freedom Now's agenda for this Saturday, September 10th, 2022. We hope that all hands are on deck in developing our international relations and solidarity as a united 88.7% of countries worldwide that were invaded by Britain, that we continue to demand reparations and stand in solidarity, as especially here in these United Snakes, may the solidarity between Black Twitter and Irish Twitter continue to grow against these colonial and imperialist forces. All hands on deck. Today's central theme is on Black communist women. We commence with our sister Luyanda Kaboka in the African Drumbeat Historical Calendar. Then, prolific author, radical historian, professor of African American Studies at the University of Houston, and Freedom Now co-producer Dr. Gerald Horne interviews Dr. Charisse Burden-Stelly, Associate Professor of Africana Studies at Wayne State University and co-editor of Organize, Fight, Win, Black Communist Women's Political Writing, here to discuss her work on the book. We also inform our Freedom Now listeners that Esther Jackson, a centenarian, revolutionary feminist who is noted in this interview, just made her transition to the ancestor world on August 23rd at the age of 105. Our condolences to her family, and we continue on in her honor. The struggle continues. Then, Dr. Horne interviews Dr. Carole Boyce Davies. She's the Frank H.T. Rhodes Professor of Humane Letters and Professor of Africana Studies and Literatures in English at Cornell University, here to discuss her book, Left of Marx, The Political Life of Black Communist Claudia Jones. Our music clip mix includes MLK, Zap Mama, Xiomara Laugart. She's the Afro-Cuban legendary singer from Havana who you're listening to now. Joey Alexander, Charles Mingus, Thelonious Monk, prison radio commentaries, and more. So sit back, tell a friend, and as always we stand, ready for revolution.
This is Brother Matef, ready for revolution. Back to you, Brother D-Don.
We thank you very much, and we give our love and our commitment to our brothers and sisters locked down inside the California National Penal System of the United States of America.
Greetings. This is the African Drumbeat Historical Calendar with Sister Luyanda Kaboka here at Freedom Now, where every day is African History Day, not just February. We review the accomplishments and tragedies of the struggling masses of humanity against the tripartite evils of national oppression, racism, sexism, and class domination. This ruling caste, who are about 1%, own and control over 75% of the land, resources, and labor of the peoples of the world. Their mastery and monopoly of psychological and military strategies maintain their domination, yet there is a growing resistance, and with our historical calendar, we provide a continuum of that struggle of resistance. September 12, 1977. Stephen Biko, organizer and founder of the Black Conscious Movement, the South African version of the global Black Power movement, is assassinated while imprisoned by racist guards. September 12, 1859. Florence Kelley was the foremost European American socialist reformer who shaped early labor and social reform legislation, including child labor laws, enforcement of minimum wage laws, factory inspection laws, and child welfare support laws. As an abused wife, she helped establish the settlement house movement for abused women. September 13, 1974. His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie Jah Rastafari, the last of the 225 descendants of the Solomon's dynasty and a founding member of the Organization of African Unity, was overthrown by the pressure of the Eritrean War and internal class contradictions, giving rise to the military dictatorship of the Derg. September 13, 1847. Los Niños Heroes defend Mexico City against the United States invasion and efforts at colonization of the whole of Mexico. September 15, 1987. U.S. orders the closing of the Palestinian Information Office as the Palestinian struggle gains broad support in the United States. September 15, 1987. 4 African girls are killed in the church in Birmingham, Alabama, bombed by the Ku Klux Klan as white resistance to integration increases violence. Today, the violence has increased many-fold through the psychological assault of the black image via the constant negative portrayal of African people in music, television, movies, and in the school system, prompting a rise of black-on-black violence. September 16, 1965. The National Farm Workers Association, UFWA, led by Cesar Chavez, calls their first strike, joining Filipino grape workers against Digririo Fruit Corporation. This marks the birth of a national movement for farm workers of all ethnicities to fight back against brutal exploitation by farm owners. September 17, 1850. The fugitive slave law passed by the United States Congress swells African immigration to Canada and Mexico. People who were suspected of being a runaway slave could be arrested without warrant and turned over to a claimant on nothing more than his sworn testimony of ownership. A suspected slave could not ask for a jury trial nor any recourse. This was federal law. September 18, 1909. Kwame Nkrumah, founder of the Convention People's Party, the All-African People's Revolutionary Party, and the Organization of African Unity, was born. He led the contemporary anti-colonial movement and the struggle against neo-colonialism. September 18, 700 AD. Ni Yingniang, the Chinese Robin Hood, traveled in the wild to help the weak, take vengeance against criminals and feudalists who preyed upon women and the poor. She was taught sword fighting by a martial artist nun at the age of 10. September 19, 1921. Moroccan guerrilla under the leadership of Abd el-Karim defeat Spain and declare the independent Rif Republic in 1921. September 19, 1790. Native Americans unite to form the United Indian Nations, led by Tecumseh, and declare war against the United States to stop the stealing of their traditional lands. September 19th, 19th century. Exceline Solomon was an African slave rebel leader who set fire to European plantations in a series of revolts in St. Croix, the present U.S. colony of the Virgin Islands. This has been Sister Luyanda Koboka, and we would like to thank you for your support of Freedom Now. on KPFK 90.7 FM and 98.7 FM in Santa Barbara. And we hope for your support in the upcoming fund drive. We wish in the spirit of solidarity to close out with the South African chant, Amandla. Amandla, awethu. Amandla, awethu. Amandla, awethu.
This is Gerald Horne for KPFK, kpfk.org, and with me on the line is Charisse Burden-Stelly, Associate Professor of African American Studies at Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan, and co-editor of the book, Organize, Fight, Win, Black Communist Women's Political Writing. Welcome to Freedom Now, KPFK Los Angeles, Professor Burden-Stelly.
Thank you so much for having me, Professor Horne.
Thank you. So why did you produce this book?
Well, this book came about because I was in a conversation with Jodi Dean. She had a student who was writing a paper on Louise Thompson Patterson and was looking for a particular primary writing that I happened to have in my possession. And then out of that exchange, which happened, mind you, when I was in the CPUSA papers at the time, we thought, oh, it might be neat to put together a collection of Black communist women's writings since they're not sort of readily or easily available. There's been a lot of secondary source material in recent years about these women, but their primary writings aren't as easily available. And so that is why we decided to produce this volume.
So what were some of the major political and intellectual contributions of Black communist women?
I think Black communist women really challenged the idea of who counted as a worker and what are the issues that needed to be lifted up when you're thinking about waging an internationalist, proletarian, socialist struggle. That if you left out Black women from the understanding of who counts as a worker, then you were missing a key demographic of organizers, of revolutionaries, and of people who had amazing skills to contribute to such a struggle. And so they came up with theories like double oppression or triple oppression, which is the idea that Black women are oppressed both as women and as Black folks. That's double oppression. Triple oppression is that Black women are oppressed as women, as workers, and as Black people. They did they did a lot of union organizing and reporting on the ways that Black women were being excluded from or incorporated in a subordinated position into labor unions. They talked about the importance of organizing domestic workers as a particular category of super exploited workers, not only because their work was not industrial labor, but also because they were working in private households. Their work was often contingent labor. It was often piecemeal. It was some of the most onerous work for very low wages or sometimes no wages at all. So, for example, white women would pay them in clothes or in food scraps as opposed to wages. And so Black women were at the forefront of pushing for organizing domestic workers and getting them things like, paid time off, access to other types of workers' benefits that they were excluded from. The organization Sojourners for Truth and Justice, which we include in here in the volume, they were integral in pointing out the relationship between war, imperialism, and the forms of anti-Black racial oppression that Black men and Black women were subjected to, as well as the role of the US government in oppressing the Black communists and Black radical leaders who were struggling against things like war and racism and imperialism. So Black women contributed tremendous ideas alongside the forms of organizing and mobilization that they did.
Mm-hmm. So your book not only deals with Black communist women, it deals with those who organized alongside Black communist women, and amongst those were the Los Angeles journalist and publisher Charlotta Bass. Provide us with a thumbnail sketch of Ms. Bass.
Yeah, so her, like some of the other women, like Claudia Jones, she was a journalist. She had her newspaper, the California Eagle, which was a very progressive, important newspaper. She was actually the first Black woman to run for vice president under the Progressive Party ticket. And so we include aspects of her acceptance speech in here, but a more interesting piece in my perspective is she was actually removed from a sorority because of her political affiliations, and she writes a letter pushing back against the red baiting and the red scare tactics that were cited for removing her from the organization. And so she was a fierce advocate of radicals and of civil rights.
Do you recall the name of the sorority? I'm looking at the book now, trying to find it.
And no, I don't. It's not one of the Divine Nine sororities. It's some other one. I know the name Roe was in there, but I can't recall the name off the top of my head.
Okay. And give us a thumbnail sketch of Lorraine Hansberry.
So of course, Lorraine Hansberry was, she's most famous for as a playwright, and as, her play A Raise in the Sun is the one that most people know, but she also was a writer for Paul Robeson's newspaper, Freedom. And so some of the pieces that we include from her in Freedom are from Freedom newspaper. She has a piece about Egyptian people and the fight that they were waging against colonialism. We have a report back that she did when she went to an international peace conference in Paul Robeson's stead. He could not go because his passport had been suspended. So those are two pieces that we include from her, but there are at least 3 biographies of her out now, and more of them are showing the sort of her radical politics as opposed to just, painting her as an apolitical playwright. So her writings are really important in here.
And what about Vicki Garvin?
Yeah, so Vicki Garvin was a trade union organizer. She was a member of the Communist Party, and she actually went in exile in the McCarthy era, first in Nigeria, and then she ended up in Ghana and ultimately went to China to teach English. And one of my comrades, Ji-Fung Liu, actually does a lot of good work on Vicki Garvin. The pieces that we include from her in here, one is called New Hope for Negro Labor, where she's talking about the sort of labor militancy that Black laborers generally, but Black women laborers particularly, are engaging in to regain some of the gains that they had made during World War II, but then they had been systematically pushed out of the industrial sector. And so that piece covers the forms of organizing that they were engaging in.
What about Claudia Jones?
Claudia Jones is amazing. So Claudia Jones is the most well-known of all of the people that we cover in this text. And interestingly, we did not include her most well-known piece in Into the Neglect of the Problem of the Negro Woman, because it is very widely available. But Claudia Jones, she was a high-ranking member in the Communist Party. She was on the National Committee. She was Trinidadian born, but basically grew up in the United States. She was a worker. She was working class, unlike some of the other women who we profile in the book. And she was deported in 1955 because of her political beliefs. And so we include a couple of her writings in here. One is on the right to self-determination for the Negro people in the Black Belt, which is her critique of Browderism, or of the turn away from self-determination and the Black Belt Nation thesis. And then another piece is that we include a piece that she talks about International Women's Day and the struggle for peace and the role of women in the global North or in the United States, the importance of them being in solidarity with women in Europe and women in the colonial world against rising fascism and against imperialism.
Mm-hmm. And of course, this Black Belt Nation thesis alludes to the point that the Communist Party held for a number of years, that Black people in certain areas of the Deep South actually constituted a nation that merited self-determination.
Exactly. And I think that the other, more important than the sort of how tenable independent Black nation was the shift in the Communist Party focus to the South of the United States that flowed from the Black Belt Nation thesis. And Robin Kelley, for one, of course, you, Gerald, write about this. Robin Kelley writes about this in Hammer and Hoe, but the Black Belt Nation thesis really took seriously Black Southern workers and the need to organize them.
Now, what about Louise Thompson Patterson, who, by the way, was a graduate of the University of California at Berkeley?
Mm-hmm. Sadly, she was in Delta Sigma Theta and not Alpha Kappa Alpha, but I don't hold that against her. So Louise Thompson Patterson was prominent in the Harlem Renaissance. She joined the Communist Party in the 1930s and did a lot of work around freeing the Scottsboro Boys. She was integral in organizing for the freedom of Rosalie Ingram, who was a sharecropper, who was first sentenced to death, but then ultimately given a very long prison sentence for defending herself against, for fighting off an attacker, a white attacker, and her son ultimately killed him. And she was integral, or she participated in the Free Angela Davis campaign later on. And she was a multi-generational leader and organizer. And we include several pieces from her. One, my favorite being Toward a Brighter Dawn, which is really one of the earliest conceptualizations of triple oppression. She uses the phrase, Negro women are oppressed as Negroes, as women, and as workers. And that piece was actually a report from the Women's Commission of the National Negro Congress. So that's a piece. And then we also have a piece from her, an excerpt from her unpublished memoir, where she's writing about her work with the Scottsboro Boys. So there's a lot from Louise Thompson Patterson in there.
Now, I should also mention, because this overlaps with some of our previous interviews with authors, that she traveled to the Soviet Union in the 1930s with the Harlem poet-writer Langston Hughes and Los Angeles' own Lauren Miller in order to try to make a movie about racism in the United States, which of course did not gain altitude. I should also mention that all of the women we've talked about thus far are no longer in the land of the living. However, there are two that are still in the land of the living, Esther Cooper Jackson and Dorothy Burnham. If I'm not mistaken, both are about 107 or 108 years old, by the way. Talk to us about these two centenarians.
Mm-hmm. So Esther V. Cooper Jackson, as you have alluded to or mentioned, is a decades-long freedom fighter who was a member of the Communist Party along with her husband, James Jackson. She was an editor of Freedom Ways in the late 1970s and 1970s and 1980s. She was a member of the Southern Negro Youth Congress, as was Dorothy Burnham. And one of the pieces that we include in this collection from Esther Cooper Jackson is an excerpt from her 1940 master's thesis that focused on Black women domestic workers and the need to organize them. She was getting her master's degree from Fisk University, and that was the subject of her thesis, which is actually really interesting and instructive. By that time, she was a member of the Communist Party, and it goes to show the ways that she used her advanced degree to basically advance the sort of, not necessarily the party line, but to advance one of the objectives of the Communist Party, and to draw attention and study systematically Black women workers, specifically domestic workers. And then the piece that we include from Dorothy Burnham we include a few. One is called American Women Join the World Peace Crusade. And that obviously is about, not unlike the piece from Claudia Jones, about the ways that women generally, and Black women particularly, were joining the struggle against peace, which, was a very dangerous thing. As we know, W.B. Du Bois was indicted by the U.S. government in 1951 for being an agent of a foreign power, precisely because of his peace work. Paul Robeson had been bludgeoned by the U.S. government for his advocacy of peace and conciliation with the Soviet Union. And so Dorothy Burnham is sort of describing and chronicling how in 1953, more and more women were joining this peace crusade because they were anti-colonial, because they were anti-imperial, and also because, warmongering took away from building up a social safety net here in the United States.
Now, I should have mentioned when we discussed Claudia Jones that when she was deported in the 1950s, she wound up in London and became a leader of the Black British community, started a newspaper there, and if I'm not mistaken, passed away in China in terms of her internationalism. But having said that, that's a lead-in to the next question, which is, what next for Professor Burden-Stelly? What do your loyal readers have to look forward to?
Well, my first single manuscript, Black Scare, Red Scare, should be coming out early 2023. And that is a book that looks at the convergences between anti-Black racial oppression and anti-radicalism in the United States between roughly 1919 and 1954-ish. My second book project I'm working on is on a theory I call mutual comradeship, which looks at the ways that Black radicals supported each other in friendships and romantic partnerships and within organizations at the intersection of sort of state repression and the rise of anti-colonial consciousness and Black liberation. So I'm looking at the sort of ethical and political practice that sustain these organizations and movements. And this feels particularly relevant now because we're seeing a new sort of wave of state repression and the ways that a lot of leftist organizations are sort of disintegrating and fragmenting, and how shifts in politics have created a lot of dissent within organizations. And so part of what I'm trying to draw out with this text is how people struggled together, even as they had differences of opinion and different identities. They still were able to come together and work together in times of extraordinary duress and state violence.
Finally, Professor Burden-Stelly, Associate Professor of African American Studies at Wayne State University in Detroit, co-editor of the book, Organize, Fight, Win, Black Communist Women's Political Writing. What advice would you give to Black girls who seek to be the next Professor Burden-Stelly?
Well, the best advice I can give is do not seek to be the next Professor Burden-Stelly. Seek to be the best, most committed, most informed version of yourself. Join an organization as soon as you're of age. Do your best to understand the historical, contemporary, and international situation. Find like-minded people to sort of build institutions and organizations with. And, don't believe state propaganda. Read widely. And don't believe any of the hype about, any of the sort of denigration of Black women. Black women can do anything that any other group could do. At the same time, don't overly glorify or have this heroic vision.
Oh, okay. Sorry, your voice dropped, so I thought you had concluded. So I'm sorry for interrupting you. Please finish.
No, I was just saying that on the other hand, just as we don't want to believe any of the denigration of Black women, don't have some heroic or rose-colored vision of Black women. Like, Black women are human just like everybody else, and we need to judge people on the basis of their politics and what they're doing for the struggle for liberation, and not just their identity category. So that's it.
Okay. Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Professor Burden-Stelly, co-editor of the book Organize, Fight, Win, Black Communist Women's Political Writing. Thank you for joining us on Freedom Now, KPFK, Los Angeles.
This is Sister Flora, and you are listening to Freedom Now at KPFK 90.7 FM in occupied Mexico, including Los Angeles, 98.7 FM Santa Barbara, 93.7 FM in San Diego, and streaming live on the web at kpfk.org. Today's program, as well as 10 prior editions, can be reheard at kpfk.org/audio archive and scroll down to Freedom Now. From 12 to 1 p.m., following Freedom Now is her sister Assumpta, with Spotlight Africa addressing issues facing Mother Africa. For a truly alternative international perspective on world affairs, check out RTTV Russia, CCTV China, and online at Presna, Latina Cuba Telesur Venezuela, News 24 South Africa, and Press TV Iran.
And now, Prison Radio Commentary from August 30th, 2022 report.
Crystal Denise Clark, my MA number is 435064. I'm in WAC, the Valley of Death. When I say this is the Valley of Death, we are suffering in here. We just lost another lady last night in here. She could have been saved. The lady been asking for help. They hit her in the infirmary, had her in there. Friday, she couldn't breathe. They left her in a room, didn't give her no oxygen, didn't give her anything. And last night, yesterday, she's gone. And it hurt my heart because I'm sitting here suffering with the same thing this lady had and it was going through, and no one even cares. This is no joke. When I really say this is the Valley of Death, this is the Valley of Death. We just sit up here sick as everyone is just sick, and just we got to deal with it. We got to handle it ourselves and get up and keep on going like nothing is wrong with our body, and then we just dropping dead. These older people is walking around here, sores, lead, bruised up, pus, everything coming out, infections, and nothing is being done. I tried to talk to the warden about my health and about others. I got shut down by Deputy Allen. She told me all I do, I'm talking about the same thing. It's my health, ma'am. I'm not getting help. Would you want me to die? I fear for my life, just like this lady lost her life. I fear that's going to be me next. Like, it's nothing is being serious. The doctors don't not doing their job on their part. They're saying there's so much wrong. No one is doing nothing, telling me I gotta get out of here to survive. And I'm not gonna make it unless I get out of here. This is terrible. I tried to talk. I've been getting retaliated, harassed by her Ron Page. I got shook down by Officer Wick. Tried to make me think that I'm sick. I got a detail for my health, my shoes, and everything. This lady tried to send me back, shook me down, didn't shake nobody else down. It's all retaliation. Then they throw up about this radio station, everything, the internet station that I'm on, and I report everything. I'm tired of hearing it. Yes, I'm going to continue on. This is the government. She sit up there, they in the newspaper talking about what she's doing. She's not doing nothing for us. She's letting us sit here suffer. Y'all glance and walk through here, they make sure everything gets taken care of, you clean up and make it look good. And the inmates do it because they fear, they scared. So when they come through here, everything look all brushed up and cleaned up because they have sprayed over, paint over, and everything. We need help in here. We are dying. We are sick in here. I'm so sick of reporting the same thing and nothing is happening. The government, I feel like she should be getting charged for this because even Hottie Washington, like y'all sitting up there letting these people die. Y'all sitting up there letting us suffer. Y'all mandate your officers every day. Then they catch an attitude because they so frustrated and take it out on us because look, they don't get to go home really. Like this needs to stop. The food is terrible. They don't have the food, bugs in the food. They not changing their gloves. They touching on everything. People are getting sick. Like the water not safe. Why? Okay, they can do Flint water. Why they can't come in here and do this water and go and fully test this water? This water is making us sick. I had a bacteria from this water. As soon as they find out where it came from, they're going to say it went away. I've been on so many antibiotics, so much medication. I'm just so sick of it. I'm trying to talk fast. My heart is so heavy for this lady. The older lady kept on asking, was she going to go home? Like, the lady was wanting to go home. Let these people go. These people have been here for 30 years. What more are they going to do? Let them go home. You don't have the right help. You don't have the right medical. You don't have food really to feed them. You run out of medication. Let these people go home. Like, this is unacceptable. This is unbelievable. Like, I couldn't believe because I haven't been seeing the lady because she always speaks to me. I always try to talk to her. I'm so emotional right now. Because they could have helped her. They should have sent her to the hospital. You see how big and swollen the fluid was on her. Y'all could have sent her to the hospital. Look at me. I'm swollen up like this. Still going on. Still running ear infection. No, they just giving me antibiotics. It's time to do the right thing. Then we go to the hospital with prisoners. We don't get treated like the right other people get treated. We get treated like inmates. enough is enough. And then next minute, I get shook down. I'm getting harassed. The warden won't hear me. Won't nobody help. The doctors don't retaliate. Oh, there's nothing we can do. We told you. I'm still a prisoner. Y'all still supposed to help. I want sisters to die. How many more it's gonna take to lose their life and they could have been saved? When y'all gonna take it serious? Shut this place down. Y'all know it's not fit for us to stay in here. Shut it down. Like, this is sad. And there's so many officers left. It's nurses left because they tired of it, and they say they tired of it. This is ridiculous. The cleaning stuff we got, this stuff making us think it's water. It's nothing. They want a GI. With GI with what? Water down stuff? You bring it to mold. I'm highly allergic to it. You spread it up. You put it in the air. It's not good. I barely can breathe. I had to sleep sometimes, sit up. I had behind a coat because I had to sit up. My face still ain't healed. Like, this is sad. This is sad. Nobody want to work here. Every time they come here and work, they quit. They are frustrated. They taking stuff home. They get sick. The warden know he get Holly Washington. The government, they know they got to be ashamed of themselves. They should be charged and fought for this. And they know they wrong. This is terrible. Like, the prisoners might as well run a unit because they don't even really have nobody to. Healthcare, you don't really have nobody. You all packed up. It's the COVID-19. It's outbreaks already in the prison. They have 20 or 16 people in the thing. Like, this is unstoppable. Like, I'm really fearful for my life. I try to put a smile on my face and walk around here because I don't want to be like that lady. I lay in the bed and then just think of and just drop dead because I've been fighting for help, not just for me, for everybody. And I get harassed and all that because of this. No, shut this place down. Let these people go.
These commentaries are recorded by Prison Radio.
This is Gerald Horne for KPFK, kpfk.org. And with me on the line is Carole Boyce Davies, Frank H.T. Rhodes Professor of Humane Letters and Professor of Africana Studies and Literatures in English at Cornell University in New York State, and author of the book, Left of Karl Marx, The Political Life of Black Communists, Claudia Jones, and editor of the book, Claudia Jones, Beyond Containment. Welcome to Freedom Now, KPFK, Los Angeles, Professor Boyce Davies.
Hi, it's my pleasure to be here talking with you.
And it's our pleasure to have you. So, who was Claudia Jones? Why did you write this book about her? And what is the significance of the title?
Well, Claudia Jones is, first of all, in my reading, one of the most important Black woman activist intellectuals of the 20th century, and born in Trinidad and Tobago, migrated to the U.S. at the age of 9, and began a life of struggle with her family following the kinds of conditions that Caribbeans ran into following migration when they came in 1924. It's just in the middle of the hardest aspect of U.S. racism and its economic relationships that still plague us, and then had to find a way to make a living as a young girl and then as a woman in that time period. And in that context, she says, found the analyses of the Communist Party, particularly the activists who spoke in Harlem, the best explanation of her particular condition. So here's a young working class Caribbean immigrant coming to the United States and having to find a way to think through what this experience means, and then trying to sort of use that knowledge to then develop her own particular ideological and activist orientation. I have to say the book was not decided to be written. The book kind of wrote itself. This is probably a little bit different from the normal process of somebody charting out a book and deciding this is what I'm going to write. I started gradually to be aware of her presence and discovered there was not much done at all on her I did the normal kinds of research. I looked at the Schomburg and so on. And at that time, there were just maybe 3 or 4 clippings. One, a biographical entry by Robin Kelly, another piece by John McClendon, and one other news item. And it was really shocking to me that there was not much else available on her. I was fortunate in that period to encounter the author of the first putting together of some of her writings in London by Buzz Johnson, who had a press called Carrier Press in London. I was at the University of Oxford, London, doing some work and peripherally encountered Buzz. And he had that book in his hand. It was a small pamphlet that said to me, those of you who are calling yourself feminists need to be aware of this. And I bought it just because. And from time to time, I would use bits and pieces of it in teaching when I was doing Caribbean literature. But I never had a sense of her breadth and the amazing contribution she gave to the world until I began to do the research on her and discovered this woman is larger than I thought. So I'm really blessed to have been able to have the opportunity to write about her and think through what she contributed and what she means. The typing of the book, Left of Karl Marx, is really very basic and very specific. It has to do with her position in life, but also the way she is interred. Her ashes are interred to the left of Karl Marx's bust in Highgate Cemetery, London. And that was really striking to me because as I stood looking at Marx's bust after I found her gravestone, I realized, wow, she's actually interred to the left. And this got clarified when a student asked me once at a conference, is she buried next to Marx? Which is what everybody would say whenever they wanted you to find her. If you go to Highgate, you have to look for Marx's bust and then you'll find her. And I said, actually, she's buried left of Marx. And actually, Sylvia Wynter, the famous creative scholar theorist, said, wow, that's the title right there. So that's how it ended up being left of Karl Marx. But I also saw it as having symbolic meaning. Given the limitations of Marxism, of course, it's amazing analysis of capitalism and the economic situations that surround capitalism and so on. At the same time, you have to go a little bit further to bring it into the contemporary. And in many ways, Claudia Jones was doing that kind of work. So her position left of Marx in a way, for me, it's not more radical, but it sort of reopens Marxism in a different kind of venue, a different kind of way, and allows us to engage her work and those ideas in more interesting ways. The intersectionality point I can come to if you want.
Oh, please do. Right.
Interestingly, I just was reading a piece by Kimberly Crenshaw because I was going through some files in my office. And Kimberly, we have to acknowledge for being the person who has been able to sort of vivify that term. I don't think she invented it. I believe it was part of an ongoing set of discourses that have to do with Black women's position in relation to race and gender and so on. So in her own writing, she deliberately uses that language of intersectionality to talk about the sort of gaps in which Black women in the law, this is her field, were not really positioned to be even seen or heard or really engaged. So she was looking at that way in which these identities come together and then what happens in terms of they're not being applied to the realities of Black women's lives, whether you're talking about the workplace, whether you're talking about political lives and so on. And then how these end up marginalizing or erasing probably Black women from being seen or heard or represented. Now, keep in mind, Claudia Jones had already written about this in a piece called An End to the Neglect of the Problem of the Negro Woman, that language I was used at that time. She doesn't name anything intersectionality. And ironically, I find that intersectionality has become one of those terms that ends up sort of being disinterred. It doesn't have any meaning anymore. You can have intersectionality of anything. The media rocks it. Everybody uses it. One of my colleagues who works in Black women and health has all sorts of combinations of intersectional relationships. There was another term, however, that was used before that by the women of the Combahee River Collective. They talked about interlocking oppression. And I think the logic of interlocking oppressions, which Lennon also uses, is probably one that probably Claudia Jones would more identify with. However, because of the fact that she talked about trying to bring together the questions of women's rights, workers' rights, and the rights of Black people together, before women, race, and class became like a sort of combined shorthand language for that same thing, allows people then to see her as somebody who is working in that area. But what I'm suggesting is that her framing would not really work with just the intersecting or the meeting then of those relationships, but would want to look at how they are layered or how they are impacting Black women's experience as it relates to our conditions in society, looking at the material relations that have to do with Black women's lives, I want to say. So I'm saying yes and no. It's a little bit difficult to totally throw out a concept that a Black woman has been so identified with. I'm not doing that. I'm just saying, Kimberly Crenshaw I'm talking about, I'm just saying that the positions that Claudia Jones took on her own politics would be something that would take it a little bit more, take it deeper and give us ways then of looking at how sort of simultaneous oppressions work to position Black women as they live and exist in the world still today.
Mm-hmm. Now, she was born, as you noted, in Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean, which also happens to be the birthplace of Henry Sylvester Williams, who could credibly be called a founder of Pan-Africanism, of George Padmore, an advisor to Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, and before that, an operative for the Communist International, Eric Williams, founding father, author of the canonical book, Capitalism and Slavery, and of course, C.L.R. James, the author of another canonical book, speaking of the Black Jacobins. So what is it about Trinidad and Tobago that has led to this outsized contribution to Pan-Africanism and radical politics? Is it the schools? Is it the influence of the oil field workers? Is it the proximity to currents from South America? What is it?
Wow, that's a question that comes up all the time, and I actually love it. And I'm pleased to really be able to speak about this the day after the 60th anniversary of Trinidad and Tobago's independence, and on Labor Day. Now, Trinidad, and you can look at this a couple of ways. For writers like George Lamming or Earl Lovelace, they argue that Trinidad, because of the way enslavement took place and the sort of variety of colonial owners, if you will, ended up being a place where people had a lot more freedom or claimed a lot more freedom than many other locations did. And it could probably be location, you're right, the proximity to Venezuela is, in some estimations, just 7 miles away, which puts us in a really interesting location in relation to the rest of the other Caribbean islands. So for Lovelace, is a certain kind of Caribbean person that was created there. And he uses the stick fighting tradition where people fight with wood, you know, the wood, the bois, they call it, where the object is to really try to bust a man's head. And it's a really interesting thing to look at, but it comes across as something that is very pugilistic and very masculine, very violent, although you have women who do it as well. So there's a kind of ethic of Trinidadian life, which according to these writers and even people like Toni Martin, that builds in a certain kind of resistance already within the culture. So one could look at it from the point of view of the cultural locations and the actual historical situations of Caribbean in Trinidad, as opposed to, for example, Barbados, which began as a slave society and so on in very definitive ways. So that's one way of thinking about it. But the other thing is that the Caribbean is not any different in terms of producing intellectuals than anywhere else. I think the question is the concentration that you identified earlier, the number of people who contributed in really major ways, mostly men, but we clearly claiming Claudia Jones as one of the amazing contributors as well, right? So the question is, how did they end up doing all of that work? A lot of it had to do with very particular kinds of orientations that people got. Definitely leftist intellectuals and teachers were part of the colonial experience that went to Trinidad and worked with people like James and so on as well. So you had a certain kind of knowledge taking place where people were adept at mastering the colonial text, but also mastering the range of world knowledges so that they could therefore bring that to bear on their analyses of the world. And then, of course, migration to other locations and seeing then the limitations of those particular colonial relationships, which were identified earlier as being very dominant and powerful, and realizing that they weren't any better than you were. And this is a good example of that is William. He had become, by the time he went to Oxford, such a master of Latin that they ended up making him a tutor in the classes that he was taking. And the idea was that the assumptions that because he was coming from the Caribbean, he did not have the same skills or knowledge was quickly disabused once he was able to demonstrate his skill and knowledge. The critique I have of what ends up happening with the Caribbean is that same pathway that people like Williams got to get to Europe ended up being one of the limitations of the society in terms of creating a kind of intellectual elite. So you end up every year having only one, and when I tell this to students, they're quite surprised. There only one island scholar. It was called the Island Scholarship, which was given to the brightest student on each island. So Williams is that person, and he goes to London. So you're talking about the most brilliant then of a particular community going forward and getting the knowledge and getting educated and being able, therefore, to come back to their countries if they will, or really do like Sylvester Williams, although he was not an island scholar, but he was somebody also similarly positioned as a lawyer who was able then to use that knowledge to really analyze the particular conditions under which he came to be who he was. So James is really good at saying that it is the material conditions that create what we end up having. It's not anything else than that. And I believe that's what I would like to end with, because it's the ability then to take that that knowledge and that situation that you have received and then look back at it with some kind of analytical lens that brings you to a consciousness that is transformative. And one sees versions of that in the US and one sees versions of that in every other place. I'm trying to deliberately not go the nationalist route by answering and saying, yes, Trinity's are the best, which I could easily do, but I tend not to do that.
Okay, fair enough. So Claudia Jones was deported from the United States in the 1950s. She winds up in London, where she becomes a leader of the emerging Black community there. If I'm not mistaken, she helps to found this newspaper, the West Indian Gazette. She travels widely. She travels to China, for example. And in terms of her travels, did she ever make it to California or Los Angeles?
You know, that's a good question. When I did the research on her, she traveled with Elizabeth Gurley Flynn for the Communist Party's Women's Commission, for which she was secretary. It said she traveled to at least 48 cities. I was not able to chart exactly how far she got, but I did not get any information about California. And this just says that there's so much more work to be done, and the kind of work that meticulous historians like you do. I'm sure you have people who would find ways to get at that kind of detail. But no, I don't have all the cities or the places that she identified, specifically as places that she actually visited and went to. A good person to probably look to do that kind of work too is Lydia Lindsay, a historian who is also writing on Claudia Jones and has done quite a bit of research on the very specific historical details of her experience.
Mm-hmm. Now, finally, Carole Boyce Davies, professor at Cornell University and author of the book Left of Karl Marx, The Political Life of Black Communist Claudia Jones. What is your advice to Black girls who may want to walk in your footsteps in the 21st century?
Wow, that is, it's a nice question. I was fortunate. I grew up with a single mother, but part of an extended family that really loved me and made sure I got everything I needed to go forward. So I had a mother who did not insist on me being domestic driven, and I was not very good at doing things at the house. I would break dishes too easily and so on. So she would be like, just leave it go away. So I was able then to be a reader. So one has to be able to have the knowledge, first of all, to build upon as you get further in life. If you don't, it's really difficult to analyze the situations that you encounter and the experiences you have, and then the knowledge that people give. You can see then where the gaps are. And for me, this is really critical. So I was able to come from the Caribbean and go to university in the U.S. And then got scholarships to study in West Africa, University of Ibadan, to study African literature on a Commonwealth scholar there. But doing that, I saw that the dominant model of studying literature was studying male writers. So my knowledge then and my ability to look at what was missing allowed me to see that there has to be a whole other group of people who are not being accounted for. These were women writers. So my point is, one has to get the skills, the analytical skills, and the other kinds of skills that one needs to do the kind of work that gives you the ability to analyze your own particular condition and how you get there, to how you got there, but also to look at what else is missing and where you can therefore apply your own particular stamp on that field, as it were. And in my field, it was literature. So in my case, then, looking at the Caribbean, and this is why the book on Claudia Jones becomes important for me, looking at the Caribbean, the point is that one sees a whole panoply of male intellectual activists, and you don't see women. So then that's the gap that clearly this work fills. So I try to teach my students, look for the gaps, and that's one of the places for sure that one can find the space to do the kind of work that one needs to do. And there are so many more than Claudia Jones. I don't want to make her the sort of singular figure as had been made by Marika Sherwood in her earlier work. But I want to see her as part of a really great collective of activist women of that time. People like Esther Cooper Jackson, who I'm so sad we lost, but what a life, to make it to 105. And many other women like her who were doing that kind of work at the same time. So the point is, get the skills, prepare yourself, look for the gaps, and keep taking it further, and really try to, therefore, enhance the knowledge field around you so that you can have that your own particular way of entering it, contributing, and then moving knowledge even further along.
Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Professor Boyce Davies of Cornell University, author of the book Left of Karl Marx, editor of the book Claudia Jones Beyond Containment. Thank you for joining us on Freedom Now, KPFK, Los Angeles.
Thank you so much.
And in closing, we'd like to thank our guests, Dr. Charisse Burden-Stelly, Dr. Carole Boyce Davies, our producers, Dr. Gerald Horne, Sister Flora, Sister Femi, Sister Tati, Brother Brandon, Sister Luyanda, our board ops Yao and Wendell, and all those who made today's program possible. Stay tuned for our Sister Assumpta coming up next with Spotlight Africa. This program, as well as prior programs, can be reheard for the next 60 days. Go to kpfk.org audio archives, scroll to Freedom Now, and until next week, signing off for Freedom Now, this is Sister Thage. As always, we stand ready for revolution.